So what does go on in the parent's mind when they're naming a baby? I don't know what went on the mind of your parents, but perhaps the naming rights should always be given to the woman in my mind because they did all the hard work there. Anyway, that's a debate for later. But what does it mean to have a name? And especially what would it mean to change your name? You see, biblically, some people are given a name at birth and all of a sudden their name gets changed. And the thing is that there's a lot into a name. And many times it's more than just a name, it's also a mission. And in the Bible you see it, like with Elijah. You know, maybe the question today for us really is about our name. You know, there's that phrase that says that you are what you worship. And many times our names, the way we get our name, has so much to do with what we worship. You know, some people worship above God, perhaps their family, and they're called family man. Maybe money, and they become money men. Or pleasure, you know, good time Charlies. Or sex, playboy. Or business, the company man. Elijah, he was Yahweh man. And so it's good to ask ourselves, what name do we really carry? In other words, who is it, or what is it that I really worship? You know, when these disciples were on this boat and they were worried about the wind and stuff, Jesus comes up and he gives them his name. Unfortunately, the Greek here hasn't come through very well. It says here that Jesus says, "Take courage, it is I." But literally in Greek, he says, "Take courage, I am," which is that same name that you hear when Moses asks, if I have to go to my people and say, "Who are you?" what name do I give them? And it's ego eimi, which means I am. I'd like to introduce somebody who has a name called Brother Seraphim. I don't think he was born with that name, but maybe his mom thought he was an angel, didn't you? But at any rate, he might be an angel, but he also probably wasn't before he turned into the uniform that he's wearing. Growing up in the South Hills, he was a blue devil. So I turn it over to our dear Brother Seraphim to talk about not just his name, but the mission that the Lord has placed on his heart. Brother Seraphim.
Good evening, everyone. So as Father Jay said, I bumped into Father Jay the other day, and I mentioned to him that I had just taken my final vows. And he very kindly invited me to come and share a little bit with all of you what that means, a little bit about my journey, why I'm here, why I wear this funny outfit. As he said, I grew up in Mount Lebanon, just actually not too far from here. And I went to St. Bernard's Parish and St. Bernard's School for elementary school. And then I went to Mount Lebanon High School. And I actually lived a pretty normal, happy life. Never once when I was a kid did I think that one day I would be dressed like this or that I would be a Franciscan. Actually, just so I can kind of get a feel, who here has seen people wearing robes like this before? Can I just get a quick show of hands? Okay. Who here knows who St. Francis is? Okay, wow. All right, great. Makes my job much easier. So St. Francis, for those of you who don't know, lived about 1200 years, in the year 1200, and he was a Catholic who started a community of men who wanted to follow Jesus and to give their lives fully to him. And now 800 years later, there are still people all over the world doing that. I'm one of those people. And I just last week took my final vows, which means that I will be a Franciscan for the rest of my life. I won't get married, I won't have children. There are three main vows that we take as Franciscans. A vow of poverty, and actually we have these ropes. They're called cinctures, but really it just means belt. And we have these three knots on our ropes that designate the three vows that we take. As Father Jay mentioned, I took my perpetual vows, which means for the rest of my life. And the three vows are poverty, chastity, and obedience. Sometimes also known as no money, no honey, and a boss. So those three vows I will take for the rest of my life. And like I mentioned a little bit earlier, if you would have told me 20 years ago that I would one day be doing this, I would have said you were crazy. So just a little bit about myself and how I ended up here. Like I said, I went to Mount Lebanon High School. I did really well in school. I ended up going to Cornell University to study math and computer science. And I had a great life, honestly. I finished at Cornell. I started working in software. And I was 21, making more money than I could spend, a lot of good friends, partying. I didn't really have... I grew up Catholic, and I went to church every week, but by the time I was in high school, I didn't really believe that God was real. I thought God was an idea, something made up a long time ago to control people, to tell you how to behave, and that's kind of where I was at. So I went to college, and God wasn't important for me at all. So I was living in Austin, Texas, working in software, like I said, making a lot of money, and in a moment, my entire life changed. I was, at the time, I guess 22, maybe 23, and I had an encounter with the person of Jesus Christ. Now, I don't think I ever realized that Jesus was a real person. You know, you hear stories about Jesus, you hear, these parables that we hear, and I always thought, these are nice stories, but the idea that Jesus is a real person that's really alive, that's present today, I would never have believed that before. Jesus is not an idea, he's not a concept, he's not a nice thing that we believe to feel better about ourselves. I had an encounter with this person, and my entire life literally changed in a moment. I was on my way to go to grad school for computer science, and I had this encounter where basically in a moment I knew for a fact that God was real, and I knew for a fact that he was calling me to be, I didn't know anything about religious life, about being a Franciscan, about priesthood, but I knew in that moment he gave me an absolute conviction that he was calling me to be a religious and a priest at that time. The Franciscan thing took a little longer, but so really incredible. And actually, the moment was a pivotal moment for my entire life. Later, when I read Acts of the Apostles, for the Pentecost experience that the apostles had, when I read that, I said to myself, wow, this happened to other people? My experience was very similar to what happened on Pentecost to the apostles. So my whole life changed. I dropped out of grad school. I went to school to study theology, and I ended up moving in this direction. And so basically, everything that I had, and like I said, I had great friends, I had a great job, tons of money. I really had a pretty ideal life from my perspective. And so I ended up moving in this direction, and it's only because of the call of Jesus Christ. The Lord, I later realized, and this is about 15 years ago that this happened, but I later realized that the Lord has a calling on each one of our life. The way it comes to us is different, right? So some people are called to marriage. Some people are called to be a nun or a priest or a brother. The way the Lord calls each person is different, but he has a plan and a call for each one of our lives. And the way he called me was in this really powerful, huge experience, because that's what I needed at the time. But every single person in the world, I came to realize, has a calling on their life from the Lord. And so why would I change? Why would I leave everything that I had and do this? Well, really only because I knew that Jesus wanted me to. And so I left everything, and I started to move down this path. So about 6 years ago, I joined a Franciscan community. We're a community of men. We're in the South Bronx. And we live in very poor areas, and we work with the poor. We have homeless shelters, soup kitchens. I actually work at a youth center, and we live in these areas. So like I said, we make a vow of poverty, so we don't own anything. We don't go shopping. Everything we live off is donations. And chastity, so we don't have a wife or kids. We live in a community of men. We pray together, we work together, we live together, we have fun together, and we do have a lot of fun. We play a lot of sports and games and things, but primarily what we do is we are consecrated, we are given over to the Lord fully. We give our life to the Lord and say, Jesus, I want to be fully yours, and so whatever that means, that's what I want to do. And so I've lived in different houses. We have houses all over the world, so we move around a lot. But I can tell you, and this is kind of the amazing thing, I went from being relatively well off to having nothing. I went from doing everything that I wanted to do, good and bad, to striving to follow the Lord. I mean, you don't, just because you wear one of these doesn't mean you become a saint overnight. I'm far from it. I struggle all the time. I mean, every human being's a sinner. Every human being struggles, and so that doesn't magically vanish when you become a Franciscan. But I can tell you that all the sacrifices, quote unquote, that religious life asks of you, that by joining a Franciscan community, that I am far happier now than I ever was when I had everything that I wanted, doing everything that I wanted in the way that I wanted. It's really incredible. And what I realized is that when the Lord has a plan for you, whatever that is, most people are called to marriage. Some people are called to be priests. Some people are called to be brothers. But following that plan and being faithful to the Lord is the source of our happiness. There is no happiness on the earth. Money, power, fame. I'm very close to my family. I have a wonderful family. Actually, the reason I'm here and not in the Bronx is that I came back for a while to visit family. And so I'm very close with my family. I love them very much. Even family. Family, as central and as crucial as it is to us, and the Lord gives us each a family so that we can love and to be with them, that ultimately God has to come absolutely first in whatever our vocation is, whether that's to be married, to be a priest, to be a sister. So what I would encourage, just in my own journey, that for me, like I said, the Lord gave me this dramatic call, but if anyone is discerning, trying to figure out what the Lord is calling, how the Lord is calling you, he most often calls in very kind of subtle ways. He calls by the desires of our heart. So for example, you all are very fortunate, you have a great priest here in Father Jay. You meet a great priest and you say, maybe I could do that one day. Maybe in my life that would be something that I could see myself doing. Or you meet a sister, a religious sister, and you're like, wow, she's really joyful. I wonder, that seems really attractive to me. These are the types of things the Lord uses, and he used those with me as well. I'm just a little hard-headed, so he had to hit a little harder for me to actually listen. But so the Lord has shown me over and over again that when we're faithful to him and when we try to do what we feel, the direction that we feel he's calling us, it is unlike anything that we could ever experience doing things our own way. So I will be a Franciscan for the rest of my life. I will be going to seminary actually this September. I'll be starting at seminary to study to become a priest. Many of our Franciscans don't become priests, but many of us do. So I will, in probably 5 years, I'll be a priest. And so please pray for me. It's a long journey. As you can imagine, there's tremendous joys, but like in any good vocation, there's also tremendous struggles. And so please keep me in prayer. It's wonderful to be here with you all. And just a little encouragement, if you feel drawn to possibly a vocation of priesthood, religious life, and you don't know what to do, talk to Father Jay. He knows a lot. He's been through a lot, and he's a great priest and a great person to talk to. And I'm sure he would be more than happy to guide you. He agrees. So
I don't know if I agree I'm a great priest, but I try. Well, wait, you never answered the question. Why Brother Seraphim?
Why Brother Seraphim? So as you can imagine,
so Seraphim is the highest level in the Christian order of angels. The Jews would put them on the 5th level, but the Seraphim's like the highest one. And St. Francis had this ecstasy-like experience of the Seraphim. So I'm not sure if any of that's the reason, or what are you trying to say?
Yes, all of that's true, but that's not. Yeah, so the name actually, my mom didn't name me Brother Seraphim. In our community, so I'm part of the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, and in our community, just like with many people in the Old Testament, right? You had Abram that became Abraham. Many other examples in the New Testament. You had Saul that became Paul, and Cephas became Peter, right? So there is for us, we often can take a new name. I basically discerned it. I'll tell you really quickly. It's kind of a funny story. I had my plan. I tend to have the way that I think things are going to happen, and then the Lord keeps showing me the way that things are, that he wants them to happen. So I had a plan, I had a list of names that I thought, well, if I'm going to take a new name, it's got to be one of these. And I went to prayer, and one by one, the Lord was very clear, like, no, 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 no. So at the end, I had 0 names left. So I thought to myself, well, what am I supposed to do with this? So in prayer, the Lord reminded me of a person, and this is a person that when I was in grad school, we studied this saint that really had struck me. He was amazing. I couldn't remember his name, but I remember, and this was years before, but he reminded me of the person. So I said, well, Lord, if this is who you want me to take, you have to give me a name. I can't be named after an idea, right? And so I went to the library. We had this big library at our friary, and I prayed and I said, Lord, you have to show me if this is the person you want me to be named after, you have to show me. So I was by myself. I closed my eyes and I prayed, and then when I opened my eyes, I just turned around, and my eyes fell on a book, and on the binding of the book said Saint Seraphim of Sarov. And instantly, I knew that that was the guy. I remembered him from years before. So I pulled the book and I read it, and on like page 3, I was like, yeah, this was definitely the guy. It turns out, I didn't know this at the time, but it turns out that Saint Seraphim is called the Saint Francis of the East. So he was in Russia, but he's very similar to Saint Francis in many ways, in his spirituality and his way of life. And it also turns out that one of our founders of our community, who had passed away a few years before, Saint Seraphim was his favorite saint. I had never met him. I didn't know this, and when I received the name, one of the brothers told me, he said, hey, I bet Father Robert's really happy. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he said, Saint Seraphim? And I thought, no, I have no idea. And he said, he's probably up there interceding for you right now. This was his absolute favorite saint. So he was a monk in Russia about 300 years ago, and like I said, he's very similar to Saint Francis, but he's Russian. So
it's not angelic then.
and because I'm angelic, which is actually, yeah, it's funny. The Seraphim are the highest choir of angels. Total coincidence.
Thank you.
So, thank you, everyone. God bless.